Due to today's tragic events, there are some changes to this evening's programmes. All Right on the Night will now be shown at a later date. In its place, a tribute to Diana, the late Princess of Wales, follows in a moment. At 10:15, Sean Bean follows the South Essex Regiment to Portugal in a feature-length episode of Sharp. Then at 12:15, with film drama starring James Garner in Decoration Day. This is Channel 3, Yorkshire Television.
Good evening. Few, if any, events will touch the lives of so many of us as the death in the early hours of this morning of Diana, Princess of Wales. The car crash in which she died in an undistinguished motorway underpass in Paris will forever be etched in our memories. In this special program, we report on the death and life of the princess. Over the next hour and a quarter, we report on the return to Britain of the princess's coffin. We'll examine how the terrible crash happened. We'll look at the facets of her life which made Diana the most famous woman in the world. We'll talk to one of her closest friends about the private Diana, and to one of her favorite photographers on his memories of the more public princess. But let's go first to ITN's Tim Ewart, who reports on the return tonight of the princess's body at RAF Northolt to the west of London. Prince Charles and the princess's sisters flew to Paris this afternoon to bring her coffin home. Tonight, the prince is back at Balmoral with his and her sons. Here's Tim Ewart's report.
An aircraft of the Queen's flight brought the princess's body home this evening, arriving at Northolt, where the Prime Minister Tony Blair had gathered with members of his government. A single black hearse crossed the tarmac, and a Royal Air Force Guard of Honour moved slowly forward. The Prince of Wales had accompanied the body back from France. Diana's coffin was draped in a royal standard trimmed with an ermine border to signify a member of the royal family. It was a mark of respect, a sign that on this sad occasion she was still to be treated as part of the family, despite her divorce from the prince last year. A line of dignitaries on the tarmac included the Lord Lieutenant of Greater London, Field Marshal Lord Bramall, and the Lord Chamberlain, who has final responsibility for the funeral arrangements. The hearse left for a private mortuary, where the princess will lie until her funeral. Prince Charles boarded the aircraft for the 1.5-hour flight to Aberdeen and the drive back to Balmoral to rejoin his sons. It was the end of a day of disbelief. Dawn had not yet broken over Buckingham Palace as people began to arrive to pay their respects, young people grieving for a princess they regarded as their own.
She was young herself, she was fresh, she was, I think she showed that the royal family wasn't something that was still stuck in the 18th century, and she tried to drag it forward.
Some stood before the palace gates and could not contain their tears, some retreated to be alone with their thoughts. And as more flowers were laid, the Scots Guard paid their own moving tribute, and a normally bustling, excited crowd fell silent. Throughout the day, Buckingham Palace seems to have been a focus for the nation's grief, a sign that for so many people the princess remained a member of the royal family and that her extraordinary public popularity had not diminished. And at Kensington Palace, where the princess lived, more flowers and more tears. A nation coming to terms with the unthinkable. At Balmoral Castle in Scotland, where the royal family has been on holiday, Diana's sons, William and Harry, were woken by Prince Charles to be told of their mother's death. They grieved in private here, but at 11:30 precisely, 3 black cars emerged from the castle and crossed the River Dee, the family on its way to church. The service in the local church lasted an hour, but not once was the princess mentioned by name. As Prince Charles and his sons left with the rest of the family, Princess Diana's brother was giving his very public and very angry reaction to her death.
This is not a time for recriminations, but for sadness. However, I would say that I always believed the press would kill her in the end. But not even I could imagine that they would take such a direct hand in her death, as seems to be the case. It would appear that every proprietor and editor of every publication that has paid for intrusive and exploitative photographs of her, encouraging greedy and ruthless individuals to risk everything in pursuit of Diana's image, has blood on his hands today.
Britain went into mourning today, united in a sense of grief and shock. Tonight the crowds were still gathering to remember a princess and to reflect on the impact her death will have on a royal family she may have changed forever. Tim Ewart, ITN, Buckingham Palace.
Paris is tonight a city of questions, and the main one is, how could such a tragic accident have occurred? Police have been questioning 7 photographers who pursued the princess's car before it crashed. She was terribly injured. Doctors tried for hours to save her, but they couldn't. Her friend Dodi Al-Fayed died instantly. So did their driver. Mr. Fayed's bodyguard survived. Following today's events in Paris, Bill Neely.
Inside, he and the princess's 2 sisters spent a few minutes silently with the body before Charles emerged, the strain clearly showing as he thanked officials and doctors for all they had tried to do. Then, in an unmarked and unremarkable vehicle, the woman whose life was so remarkable was driven through Paris for the last time, just 18 hours after the short journey that had caused her death. This is what's left of the Mercedes in which the Princess of Wales and her companion Dodi Al-Fayed were being driven back to his house. Witnesses say the car was being pursued by photographers on motorbikes. Whatever the cause, it's clear that when he entered this tunnel alongside the River Seine, the driver lost control, crashing into a pillar on one side, then with full force into a wall on the other. You'd hardly recognize this as a car, the engine rammed up into the rear passenger area. Miraculously, Diana's bodyguard sitting in the front survived this. Dodi Al-Fayed died instantly in the back seat. The princess, who was sitting alongside, suffered terrible chest injuries. The driver died immediately. At first, ambulance crews managed to keep the princess alive, but her heart had stopped beating by the time she was admitted to hospital. The surgeons fought for 2 hours to restart her heart. At 3 o'clock this morning, London time, they admitted defeat and announced that Diana, Princess of Wales, was dead. Britain's ambassador had been at her bedside.
The death of the Princess of Wales fills us all with deep shock and with deep grief. And our thoughts and our prayers are with her family and her friends.
Near the scene of the accident, French police officers examined motorbikes used by photographers to chase the princess's car. The men who were riding them are still being held for questioning. The accident happened in central Paris, not far from the Eiffel Tower. The couple had left the Ritz Hotel just after midnight. Within seconds, their car was being chased at high speed around the cobblestoned Place de la Concorde. It was heading west along the River Seine when it entered the underpass near the Alma Bridge and crashed. The road at this point rises and falls regularly. As it enters the tunnel, there's a sharp bend and a dip into darkness.
The car was just travelling at such speed, and it was almost as if it was in too high a gear. It really, really was tearing away. I don't know, maybe it was doing at least 80, maybe 100 miles an hour.
At first light, the police began trying to piece together the last moments of what had been a romantic weekend. This is the exact spot where the Princess of Wales's car crashed. The police chalk marks the spot where the car hit the curb. From here, it's thought it flipped over, careered across the road, and hit the tunnel wall on the other side at great speed. Outside, hundreds of Parisians have been leaving flowers, the site already becoming a shrine to a woman much admired in France. Paris, too, is in shock tonight.
I think she was also our princess. That's what we feel in France, but I think it's the same all over the world.
And at the hospital where Diana's body had lain for 18 hours, more flowers and more grief.
Oh, Diana, why?
This distraught French woman said the Princess of Wales had been her heroine ever since they'd met at a charity in South London. But the charities and the good causes, the glittering balls and the lavish holidays are over now. Diana should have been coming home today to see her two sons in London after a summer holiday. Instead, her body was brought home, crushed and broken. It was carried carefully, 8 RAF servicemen bearing it up towards the belly of a plane. She was called today the People's Princess. She wanted to be known as the Queen of Hearts. She will now forever be remembered for her violent, wholly shocking death. The Prince of Wales took her back, calmer now, and the plane left France for England, leaving behind a stunned city and a stunned continent. Diana, Princess of Wales, is dead. Bill Neely, ITN, Paris.
And Bill Neely joins me now from the scene of the accident. Bill, a scene, I'm sure, tinged with great sorrow tonight. What's happening there?
Yes, you join me at the very scene of the accident. The traffic now freely flowing into the tunnel where the Princess of Wales lost her life, about 200 yards from where I'm standing now. I am surrounded by hundreds of people who have really been coming here all day to lay flowers at this area, which, as I said, has become a shrine. Someone has pinned up a Union flag on the bridge. This is a really historic and beautiful spot. Of course, it will now be remembered for something quite different.
Bill, there was some talk today about the possibility, no more than that, of manslaughter charges being brought against those who pursued the princess and didn't come to her aid after the crash. What can you tell us about that?
Well, the police and the state prosecutor are both trying to do just that, and that would be a big change because it would mean that the princess was killed. They have 7 photographers in custody. They have laid charges before a magistrate against 4 of them, but we do not believe at the moment that those charges are manslaughter. And they are questioning 3 others. It's believed most of those 7 came to Paris from the Mediterranean. They followed the princess here in order to take her photograph, and they are concentrating on one photographer who they think may have got in front of the princess's car in order to take a photograph through the windscreen of the princess and Dodi Al Fayed together. Quite how he did that, quite how the car crashed, is still a mystery, but as you said at the beginning, there is a palpable sense of tragedy here in Paris tonight.
Bill Neely in Paris, thank you very much indeed. As news of the death of the princess spread around the country and around the world, tributes poured in from everywhere. Perhaps no one put it better than a shaken Tony Blair. The Prime Minister said she was the people's princess. Our political editor, Michael Bronson, reports.
The whole of Britain has been grieving today. In the morning rain, outside a tiny County Durham church in a village in his constituency, it fell to the Prime Minister, as leader of Her Majesty's government, to try to put that national grief into words.
You know,
how difficult things were for her from time to time, I'm sure we can only guess at, but the people everywhere, not just here in Britain, everywhere, they kept faith with Princess Diana. They liked her, they loved her. They regarded her as one of the people. She was the people's princess. And that's how she will stay, how she will remain in our hearts and in our memories forever.
For one of those listening, it was too much to bear. Sleep after that, it had been far from easy. In his tribute in his North Yorkshire constituency, the leader of the opposition, William Hague, spoke of the love and compassion the princess had shown.
The work that she did for so many charitable causes did actually reflect a genuine human warmth and compassion and interest. She had a lot of love for people.
What, Paddy Ashdown was asked, would she be remembered for?
I just don't think it's possible to make that kind of judgment yet. It will need a rather more rational and cool view. I think in the aftermath of this horror and the very, very personal tragedy, that's the thing I think we should remember at the moment. Each of us will feel a sense of loss, but let all of us remember that whatever our loss is, it's nothing in comparison to the loss of her family, and I think all other matters can wait until later.
From the Duchess of York, who shared with Diana the pain of the breakup of a marriage, a statement issued by her office. It said, "The Duchess has lost someone she has always considered a sister and a best friend. There are no words strong enough to describe the pain in her heart. The world has lost the most compassionate of humanitarians and someone so special whose presence can never be replaced." The news, of course, raced around the world. At British embassies and high commissions here in Washington, flags were lowered to half-mast, and back from around the world came the tributes. President Clinton broke into his New England holiday to pay his respects.
We liked her very much. We admired her work for children, for people with AIDS, for the cause of ending the scourge of landmines in the world, and for her love for her children, William and Harry.
So many of the tributes have focused on the way Diana could talk with and hold and touch the sick and the wounded and the dying. In the past, Mother Teresa of Calcutta saw that for herself. This was her tribute to the princess today.
She had great love for the poor. She was very often anxious to help me to come to know a little more about the poor.
Earlier this year, the princess had a happy meeting with President Mandela of South Africa. Today, he said,
"She was undoubtedly one of the best ambassadors of Great Britain, associated with worthy causes."
But back home, here in Britain, in villages and towns like Knowle in Warwickshire, it's not been the words of the great and the good, but the silent prayers and thoughts of millions of ordinary people, which have been the greatest tribute. Michael Brunson, ITN, Westminster.
I'm joined now from Westminster by our political editor, Michael Brunson. Michael, there was a hint today that the government does not intend to make any immediate changes to those laws about privacy and intrusion, which so concern and connect with this tragic story.
Trevor, that's right. There's a great sense in government that nothing but nothing must be done now in a rush. There must be no feeling of haste within the government, I think, and that's why there's not going to be any special gathering of the cabinet. The way it's being put by one Downing Street source tonight is that the business of government will continue, but politics will stop. And only after a long period of reflection, I think, would anything come forward about the possibility of changing the laws regarding privacy or the laws governing the press. We have a voluntary code at the moment. It's been toughened up. Certainly there'll be a debate, a great debate within the press. None of us, no journalists, myself included, can possibly go through today without thinking through very carefully how we should behave in future and what all this means. But no, the government does not want to rush into anything.
Mike, I take that point, but surely any government which pretends to be listening will have to deal with the revulsion that people feel about the circumstances which may have contributed to this tragic death.
I think the revulsion, perhaps, those issues will come later. What I gather the Prime Minister has been very struck by today is the way that he has sensed that what he was saying earlier about people keeping faith with Diana is for the moment
the most important thing. And he is struck by the way that the tributes have come from famous people around the world, but from the ordinary people as well. We heard earlier just some ordinary people outside Buckingham Palace expressing their thoughts. And that, I think, for the moment, is going to be sufficient. Yes, there will be the revulsion at what has happened, but that perhaps comes for later. For now, the Prime Minister, like the rest of us, I think, is thinking, just let us have this thing sink in. Let us be with our thoughts for the moment.
Michael Brunson, thank you. The princess died as she'd lived, pursued by photographers. We've already heard the anger the princess's brother Earl Spencer directed at the media, emphatically blaming them for what happened. But as we heard, the government made it clear today that it's much too early to say whether laws on privacy and intrusion should now be reviewed. Our Home Affairs editor Jennifer Nadel reports.
Photographed and followed wherever she went, tonight the focus was firmly on those who pursued her, amid calls for an urgent inquiry into the role of the media.
Mr. Al-Fayed believes that this appalling tragedy would never have happened but for the attentions of these people who I suppose we shall have to call photographers. It was quite appalling what happened, and we're just coming to terms with that.
The European Convention on Human Rights will give a general right to privacy, and calls for tougher measures have so far been rejected in favour of continued self-regulation.
I think there has been concern in Britain, in the press and the media, that there should be a line drawn, and that it should be drawn by a responsible press and by responsible media, rather than having it drawn for them by others, with the development of a stronger press complaint system. And I'm certain that that is the right way to go. The paparazzi clearly wouldn't have been pursuing her were it not for the fact that the photographs that she of her that they took earned so much money for them.
Recent photos of the princess in Saint-Tropez sold for hundreds of thousands of pounds. Newspaper editors say legislation wouldn't have quelled the pursuit of the ultimate photo, which could have fetched £1 million.
France has very stringent privacy laws. They were completely ineffective, both at Saint-Tropez and clearly in Paris. The story about the Prince of Wales, the story about the breakup of the royal marriage, was a worldwide story. It had huge market potential in every country in the world. Even if you banned it in one country, the market would still be sufficiently great to ensure that the harassment continued.
And while some argue that those who court publicity shouldn't then be able to shun it, there was some support from within the press for greater protection.
I think a law that draws a distinction between what the public functions carried out by public people and their private lives. And going out for dinner with your boyfriend, it seems to me, is something that is clearly private. It's no business of anybody else's.
A sentiment clearly supported by mourners gathering at Buckingham Palace earlier today.
Why did they pay so much money for the photographs? Why were the paparazzi after them?
Constant pressure for an immediate reaction, there were reports from the States that pictures of the fatal crash were being offered for sale to the highest bidder. An opportunity, perhaps, for the press to show whether its attitude has changed. Jennifer Nadel, ITN.
Now to Kensington Palace and to our royal correspondent Nicholas Owen, who's been reporting on today's events since the news first broke. Nick, what's happening there tonight?
Well, this is Kensington Gardens where we are now. Behind us up there, Kensington Palace, the London home of Diana, Princess of Wales. And as you can see over my shoulder, Trevor, hundreds of people, literally hundreds of people are out here tonight. A place of pilgrimage, that is the only way to describe it. People of all ages, lots of children. And you know, the odd thing to me really is how quiet it really is here. Yes, there's the noise of traffic, London traffic, going on as ever behind us. But in this park, you know, there's a little bit of hubbub, but not much. It's really very, very quiet indeed. And they're going to leave this park open, the police say, until 1 o'clock in the morning. Usually it closes at dusk. What you can't see out there in the darkness, the flowers, masses and masses of flowers, lining railings running all the way up to Kensington Palace behind us there, up to those golden gates. Beyond it, the palace, no lights in the windows there, a sort of shuttered, forlorn, awful look, I have to say there.
Nick, tell us what you know about the funeral arrangements.
Well, it was hoped at one stage, hoped or expected, I should say, that Buckingham Palace would be in a position to announce the funeral arrangements tonight, but they have said in the last hour or so that in fact it won't be now until tomorrow morning. Much stress is being laid on the fact that they want full consultations with the family. Now, of course, the royal family are very concerned in this, but there is also very much the feelings of Diana, Princess of Wales's family. Her two sisters who accompanied Charles on that terrible journey to Paris to bring back the body of the princess, and also Earl Spencer, her brother, who spoke so angrily today about the activities of the paparazzi and the press, who he said had hounded his sister to death. All those views taken into account. So what sort of funeral we get at the end of it is by no means certain. Presumably it will be a big national event, you know, a state funeral in all but name, probably, in which case a funeral service at Westminster Abbey followed by burial at St George's Chapel, Windsor. But you know, that can't be taken for granted at the moment. It is possible that it will all be private. Perhaps that's what the families will want. We will have to wait and see. And we also, of course, think so much tonight of William and Harry, the princess's two sons, and the awful tragedy that has befallen them in particular on this awful day, Trevor.
Nick, thank you. Nicholas Owen, reflecting on a tragic day for our nation and for the royal family. Let's take a look now at various aspects of Diana's life and her undoubted achievements. And we begin with the effect she's had on the royal family and the revolutionary changes she brought about. Here's James Mates.
The summer of 1981 and the House of Windsor seemed as secure as it had ever been. The heir to the throne had a bride, the nation had its fairy tale. Into the monarchy had come a young woman of aristocratic background and training who would give the institution youth and sparkle well into the 21st century. Not only that, but within a year there was a male heir as well. Surely no royal house could have its future so clearly and happily mapped out. The new princess was a breath of fresh air, certainly, but more than that, she was changing the whole business of royalty. In came the cameras, going behind the scenes at the family firm. Out went some of the stuffiness, the reserve, the distance, and along came the adoring crowds wherever she went in the world.
She almost single-handedly rejuvenated the monarchy in the 1980s when all was going well, and there was that parade of weddings and births that had the nation almost permanently en fete, and they were on the front pages every day then, but it was all good news, and the family monarchy, which is a 20th century creation, was going strong.
It was more than just a change of style. The shy princess had suddenly turned out to hold very strong views on the future of a 1,000-year-old institution, views she wasn't prepared to change.
I would like a monarchy. I'd like to be a queen of people's hearts, in people's hearts. But I don't see myself being queen of this country.
This is the Children's Hospital. Some of my friends are here. A slimy thing bit Martin.
Hearse to emerge. Let's just get your reaction to some of those extraordinary events we saw earlier this evening.
Yes, well, they come so thick and fast now. It's a little bit difficult to sort one from the other, isn't it? But just to remind ourselves, there was first of all the appearance this afternoon of the three princes, Charles, William and Harry, at Kensington Palace, looking at flowers, taking flowers from people and laying them and talking to the crowds there. Then there was the and William and Harry behaving in what must only be described as an amazingly exemplary fashion then. There was the Queen arrived at Buckingham Palace and got out of her car with the Duke of Edinburgh, and she looked at flowers, talked to lots of people and so on. And then there was the Queen's broadcast live at 6 o'clock on all television networks right across the world, I would imagine. So there has been so much. But I tell you, my one overriding impression is that if there was a great wave of criticism lapping at the royal family's doors a lot of it must be now going the other way, because the Queen addressed herself particularly to this business of Diana. She paid a very moving tribute to her, exceptional and gifted human being she called her. And there was another phrase that really stuck in my mind. I, for one, this is the Queen speaking, I, for one, believe there are lessons to be drawn from her life and from the extraordinary and moving reaction to her death. I share your determination, the nation at large, to share her memory.
So the Queen clearly saying there that she's learning from that death.
Yes.
Can I just bring in Ron Allison here, of course, a former press secretary to the Queen. Ron, what did you make of that speech? Was it the kind of speech you wanted the Queen to make?
Absolutely. The Queen, obviously, she spoke to me. In a sense, she was speaking for me, but she was, above all else, speaking for herself. That was from the heart. Those were her words. I found it very, very moving indeed, and it summed up in a way that only the Queen could in this particular situation, the feelings and the emotions that we've all been sharing. It was produced in the sense that the Queen was placed in a particular position which showed her, as it were, in amongst the crowd. That was absolutely appropriate that should be the case. And it was an extension of what had been happening, as Nicholas has just been saying, earlier in the afternoon. I found it exactly the right kind of occasion, the right kind of address. They were exactly the right words that certainly I wanted to hear.
Well, while we're waiting for the coffin to depart, let's just take a moment to look at the route it will be taking. When it leaves St. James's Palace, the Chapel Royal there, it will then go up the Mall, past Buckingham Palace, then along the side of Hyde Park Corner. From there it heads up Palace Avenue towards Kensington Palace, Princess Diana's home. And Adrian Britton is at St. James's Palace now. Adrian, can you describe the scene for us there now?
Yes, I can, Dermot. The crowds are pouring into this area around St. James's Palace. First of all, what you can't see, and that is in front of me, people leaning out of their office windows, lining the street along Pall Mall. What you can see behind me is the Marlborough Road, which runs alongside St. James's Palace. Crowds stretching maybe 300, 400 yards right down to St. James's Park. They've been here all this afternoon. The crowds may be, 15, 20 rows deep. And it is here where the Queen and Prince Philip left St. James's Park this afternoon and went and talked to a few of the crowds. Where we're expecting the hearse to leave is to my other side, stretching down Cleveland Row. The hearse went in through the main gate there just after 7 o'clock. You'll see next to the main gate the candlelit windows of the Royal Chapel. Here where Prince Charles and the young princes are believed to have paid their last respects, where the coffin has lain in rest. What a moment that must have been for the princes. Today they have gone through a very dignified and strong show of grief at Kensington Palace, at the pictures that we saw earlier. But this is so very, very different, because surely for the first time when they're in that chapel, they must have been hit by the physical reality of what has happened. I can't imagine any other boys in the world who've gone through what they've been through today. And most probably Prince Charles has watched very, very closely how his sons have coped with that. We understand that Prince William wants to walk behind the coffin tomorrow, but of course when they go through this situation things can change. And as you're well aware, I mean, we don't know the arrangements in full. It does change. We are dealing with two young boys and how they are having to cope.
Adrian, just to go back to that visit to the Chapel Royal you mentioned with the Queen, and the Duke of Edinburgh, of course, went there earlier in the afternoon. Then afterwards they went to talk to the crowds waiting outside. What has the reaction of the crowd been to that?
Virtually universal. I was huddled down in the crowd behind me with a radio, listening to the broadcast, and the reaction has been one of the same. Let me just go through. Virtually everybody felt that the Queen was it was a very, very heartwarming message. They said that she obviously feels saddened by this. I was talking to a mother and daughter, and they said, well, basically, she sounded human. She sounded as though she really cared, that she spoke from the heart. And perhaps more poignantly, I think she said, well, she really has spoken for every one of us today. Now, there were a couple of people who said, well, maybe the broadcast was slightly short, maybe it did come too late, but this isn't the time now to go over old criticisms. They were virtually united in their beliefs, and they all said that it did show that she cared and that she did have a human side.
Adrian, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's go now to Kensington Palace. Mark Webster is there. Kensington Palace, of course, where this afternoon Prince Charles and the Princes William and Harry talked to the crowds, accepted flowers, hugged people, shook hands there. Mark, what is the mood there now?
Well, there are similar scenes here. There are literally thousands and thousands of people who turned up, a little gentle evening rain falling. You can see off in the background there some of the candles that are still burning that were lit earlier. There are thousands and thousands of bouquets of flowers which have been left there in tribute to Diana. Off in the distance, perhaps very dark now, is Kensington Palace, where, of course, after this part of the slow and sad journey, her body will actually spend there tonight. Now, having talked to a number of people, they're very much thinking the same way as Adrian was just saying about the Queen's broadcast. What they say frequently is that they desperately want, after the acrimony and the accusations and counter-accusations since these tragic deaths, that there should be a period of harmony, so that everybody, the millions who watch at home, the millions who will be in London here tomorrow, will be able to show the sort of harmony that will follow the tragic death of Diana.
And Mark, as I was saying there, this is, of course, where earlier in the day Prince Charles and the Princes William and Harry talked to people there. We heard people shouting, "William, we love you," "Charles, we love you." There were tears, there were hugs. What effect has that had on people there?
It's been profoundly important. What's so fascinating about here, given the huge number of people, is the relative silence. There's nothing really but the distant echo of a million sighs that have been uttered here over the past week. People walk around, but they do, rather as the Queen said, they want to grieve, and they also want to show their respect for an extraordinary woman and the other two who died, of course, in that accident. And that is very much the mood.
Well, Mark, Kensington Palace is, of course, tonight where the Princess ends her journey, but it is, of course, the starting point of the funeral tomorrow. Are people already taking their places there?
They certainly are. Despite the rain, despite the inclement conditions, they're already lining up. And any number of people have come up to me and said, you know, where can I get a view? Where can I pay my last respects? Because they are very, very anxious to share in this extraordinary national expression of grief. And as I say, any number of them will be here tonight, and I think all over the streets of London, awaiting tomorrow morning. And as I say, the last sad and slow procession from here tomorrow.
OK, Mark, thank you very much indeed. Let's just take a quick look now at some of the main points along tonight's route. Cross first to about the midpoint of the route at Hyde Park Corner. As you can see there, normal London traffic at the moment. That, of course, will be cleared as the Princess's hearse comes through. The crowds gathering. Just see them in the bottom corner of her picture. A little light drizzle falling, a few umbrellas there. These are more scenes just a bit further along from Hyde Park Corner now, moving along Knightsbridge. And there we are, I think, back at the junction of Knightsbridge with, that's just coming down from Hyde Park Corner. So Nick Owen is with me in the studio. Nick, one thing that strikes you there is the stillness amongst the crowd there, the silence.
That's been such a feature of this thing, hasn't it? When the Queen was there today and when the Prince Charles and his sons went along, that silence changing into bursts of applause. We keep talking about this rather strange phenomenon, really, but, you know, keep coming back to the phrase that was used right at the beginning. This is going to be a unique funeral for a unique person, and frankly, everything that's happened has been unusual and highly unpredictable. I could pick up one point that Adrian Britton was making about the young princes walking behind the coffin. William has expressed a wish to do so. I would judge from what we saw of him today that he will be doing that. He's obviously gearing himself up to do it, determined to do it. I think Harry will do it. I think the Prince of Wales will be there. But it is our understanding that it won't be the whole route. they will join the funeral procession at St James's Palace. I suppose that makes it about the last third of the journey.
Right, which was, of course, where the funeral procession was originally meant to start. That would have been the whole.
That's quite correct, yes. So I think that will be a sensible thing. But the same thing is being said all the time. The decision is for them to make on the day.
Nick, let's just remind people of why we're on the air tonight. We're expecting the removal of the Princess of Wales' coffin from the Chapel Royal there at St James's Palace. There are live shots of the scene. We are expecting her coffin to be removed any time now, taken on this shortish journey through London to her home at Kensington Palace. Ronald Allison, the Queen's former press secretary, is with us here in the studio as well. Ronald, one is put in mind of the last time we saw the Princess of Wales coffin, which of course those awful, awful scenes on Sunday night.
Yes, I mean, so much has happened in the intervening days, and there's still this feeling amongst so many people of shock and of numbness, but I think the expressions of the grief that have been possible by so many people during the week, well, they've been obviously very, very moving indeed, but they've been of a great relief to very many people as well. Why have so many people done what they've done this week? People feel that that I must do something. I've got to express my grief. I can't just stay at home. I've got the opportunity to go to one of the palaces, and it has been quite remarkable. And I think that what happened this afternoon at Kensington Palace, as far as the two young princes are concerned, Prince William and Prince Harry, I think if they do walk in the procession tomorrow, it will be very largely because they feel we can cope with this. The people do love us. If they've been influenced at all by some of the midweek reaction, anyway, as it was reported, I think now they will be feeling it will be all right. It would be it would have been unnatural if they hadn't perhaps been a bit apprehensive and as to how they themselves would feel about it all. But it was just so moving this afternoon, watching the two of them.
Nick, picking up on some of those points, just remembering back, just 5 days to that Sunday night as we sat here and watched the hearse coming back, watched the coffin coming back from Paris on that sad journey. How much has changed in those 5 days? Was it really only 5 days ago?
Yes, I think it was a very important moment for the country because of the death of the Princess of Wales, which was obviously a shattering event. But what it's also turned into is perhaps a new way of looking at the monarchy. I don't think anybody's quite sure where we go from there. And I pick up that point Her Majesty made. You know, there are lessons to be drawn from her life and from the extraordinary and removing reaction to her death. So, you know, this means that everybody's got to think rather carefully about this. Reactions from the palace to things have been very swift. They have taken account of people's feelings. Flags have been changed, you know, and all sorts of things have changed. But of course, it's all very well to do it in these circumstances, but where does it leave everybody's view of the monarchy in this country? Where does it leave the Queen's future, the Prince Charles's future, and ultimately, of course, the future of Prince William, who will be king one day himself?
Well, let's just remind ourselves of some of the extraordinary scenes we've witnessed this afternoon that we've just been talking about there. The first one we saw was, of course, Prince Charles and the two young princes, William and Harry, spending time with the mourners outside Kensington Palace. Let's just see a few of those pictures. They spent a lot of time just reading the messages, just absorbing there the outpouring of grief and affection for their mother. That mountain of flowers. Then they went to talk. The car just behind containing Prince Charles and his sons Prince William and Harry. There's some of the extraordinary scenes amongst the crowds, rushing forward to get a better view, rushing in front of the hearse. There, the final few metres before the hearse turned into Kensington Palace. Flowers being strewn in front of the hearse. Huge crowd gathering for tomorrow. final scenes from Kensington Palace this evening, and there'll be full coverage of the funeral itself on ITV tomorrow. GMTV will report from 6 o'clock in the morning on the preparations, and here at ITN we'll have uninterrupted coverage of the funeral itself from 8:30 in the morning through to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That's the funeral of Diana, Princess of Wales, on ITV at 8:30 tomorrow morning, presented by Trevor McDonald. From all of us here, goodbye.